Hey everybody, welcome to Drive Thru Review 659. Today we're going to talk about Watergate. This is a new game coming from Capstone Games, designed by Matthias Kramer. And as you might expect, it's about the Watergate crime and cover-up in the 1970s under the presidential administration of Richard Nixon, and the investigation by the Washington Post. And that's who the players are taking the role of. It's a two-player game. One side is the Nixon administration, the other side is the Washington Post and its editors and reporters. And it takes about 30 to 45 minutes, and it takes place through card play, not unlike Twilight Struggle, some other card-driven style of games, but it does play out very much differently than Twilight Struggle. And what you're trying to do as the editors and the reporters is uncover pieces of the investigation and make links back to Nixon himself. And then the Nixon administration, of course, is trying to thwart that. So let's jump in and take a quick look at how it works, and then I will give you my thoughts on it. Okay, so I've got the game here set up like it would look at the beginning of the game. A couple of things to take note of. You can see in the center of the board here we have Nixon himself, and you can see you have several sort of connections and threads, literally and figuratively, drawing from some of these kind of co-conspirators and whatnot back to Nixon himself. And then we have this initiative track over here, which players are going to be doing kind of a little tug of war with. And there's actually two tokens here. One is the initiative token itself, and then you also have these red momentum tokens. And then a new one of these is going to come out every round. So as these get distributed, you're going to put out a new one every single round there. Now, one of the first things Nixon's going to do every round is draw these evidence pieces out of this black bag here. They're going to take three of them and they're going to look at them in secret. So they all have this kind of back on them. But on the other side, they have these different colors. And sometimes you might have two colors. So this one is yellow and blue, and these are just a single color, like that one's yellow. So they're going to take a look at those, just kind of know what they are, and not show them to the Washington Post player. And these are also going to go on the initiative track, and these are going to be manipulated as well during the course of a round. Now, a round takes place through the course of card play. And to start the game, you'll put this card kind of in between the players, and this side here where it says initiative, draw 5 cards. This one will be facing the editors, the Washington Post players, and then this top part will be facing Nixon and his administration there. So you can see here, the Washington Post is going to draw 5 cards, whereas Nixon, in this case, is going to draw 4 cards. And there's a little reminder for Nixon to pull out those evidence tiles, just like I showed you. So each player is going to draw the specified number of cards off their deck, and we'll take a look at these cards real quick. They are sort of, let's say, biologically the same between each deck, but Nixon has his own deck and the Washington Post has his own deck that he's playing out of. And so you can see a couple things. Here's going to be kind of like an influence number here at the top, and it's going to kind of tell you what type of evidence you can manipulate. Green, or this could be any blue, green, or yellow. There's 3 different colors in the game, or yellow, and so on. And the other part of the cards is going to have some kind of event or special ability that you can do on your turn. So on your turn, the players will simply play a card and typically discard it, but sometimes actually remove it from the game altogether. You can see a lot of times these events have this kind of orangey pink background there, and it'll say remove this card from the game if you play it for the event. Now, if I played this card for the top part and not the event, then I wouldn't remove it. So you're making a choice between kind of manipulating the influence track here with this kind of top corner, or playing the effect of the event and doing just what it says there. So through the course of play, you're going to be manipulating here the initiative token, the momentum token, these evidence markers here, and also playing events, like I said. So once an evidence marker moves off this starting space, you're going to then flip it up, so you're going to see what it actually is. Now, Nixon knows what they are. So if Nixon were to play a card, let's say like this one here, to move yellow evidence 2 spaces, then they would have to flip up and look and say, okay, I've got this one that has some yellow on it, so then I would move it 2 spaces towards me. If the Washington Post player wanted to play it, let's say I did this one, they would call out a color that matched what was here, and then Nixon would tell them if that color existed. And then if not, it's no big deal, they just can't do it. They instead could then move one of the trackers 2 spaces. So when you play it for these kind of an influence number here, you're either moving these tokens, the indicated number of spaces towards you, or influence equal to that color. And the events and things will manipulate this as well, but it'll just be very specific about what you can do. And it will also kind of start to immediately interact with this board here. So before we talk about this board, let's talk about what happens after each player has played all their cards, and then you're going to take a look and see where things kind of shake out here. And there's a nice little reminder here to kind of tell you what you do at the end of the round after everybody's placed. So any evidence tokens that haven't left the board here, haven't left the 0 spot, go back into the bag here for further investigation, possibly at a later turn. The side that has the initiative token will have this side facing them, which means they get to draw 5 cards on the next turn and get to go first. So they get a little bit of an advantage on the following turn by having that there. Now if this is at the 0 spot, then this will just swap sides from whoever it was previously on. And then whoever has the momentum token on their side will take and put it on their card. So each player has a momentum card. Here we can see we have Nixon here, and this is one of the ways Nixon actually wins the game. If he just gets 5 momentum tokens over the course of 5 different rounds, then immediately he wins. And that's really what he's trying to go for, as well as preventing the Washington Post player from drawing connections, which I'll talk about in a minute. Now the Washington Post player, as he starts to add these, he's not going to win the game if he gets 5, but you can see as he gets the 3rd, 4th, and 5th one, he's going to get special abilities. Now the other thing is, once you have an evidence token on your side at the end of the round, you can then take and place it on a matching space. So you can see this one is a yellow or blue. And again, there are 3 different colors in the game. You've got yellow spaces over here, green spaces here, and then some blue ones. So in this case, since Nixon took it, he can take and put this on a yellow or blue space. Now when Nixon puts it out, he's going to put it face down, and that's going to act as kind of a blocker, because remember, you're trying to make connections from these various individuals back to Nixon. So Nixon wants to kind of try to block that off. So he maybe would put it here right next to him, so that effectively closes this route out, and now the other player has to kind of go around. Now if the Washington Post player had won that, they would put it face up. And again, what you're trying to do here is draw a line from 2 different conspirators here, co-conspirators, back to Nixon of unbroken kind of face-up tiles here. So let's say we had drawn this little thing here like that, like so. Now we have these 3 tiles going back here to Baldwin. Now the other piece that you need to kind of make a linked connection there is to have this character here. Each of these guys have their own, well, not just guys, there's gals too. This is the secretary here, Martha Mitchell. And each of these characters here has a face-up side as well, and also a face-down side. Now that happens through events. So Nixon's got events in his deck that will then tell you to go fish this off the side of the board over here and then put that face down, basically bringing that character permanently into the fold and not flipping on Nixon, if you will. Now the Washington Post player is trying to get these out and then again draw from 2 separate co-conspirators an unbroken line, no matter how it winds around, back to Nixon to a face-up character that possibly has flipped on Nixon, so to speak. Now the other thing to keep in mind about this track is, as soon as some piece hits the 5 on either side, it immediately comes off the board and then will be awarded immediately. So if Nixon were to pull this all the way across, he could then take it immediately and not just wait till the end of the round and put it face down. And the same goes with the momentum tracker. If this goes all the way to the 5, then whoever gets it can immediately put it on their card, and the initiative token as well. If you get it to 5, you just pull it off the board and you've locked in the initiative and so on for the next round. And so we've really seen the 2 ways to win. Nixon wins when he gets the 5 momentum markers on his card and prevents the linking of information back to himself. And the Washington Post player wins if they link 2 conspirators back to Nixon, and then also Nixon doesn't hit the 5 momentum markers. The other rare way, which I have seen come close but I've not actually seen happen, is if all of these momentum markers are in play and neither player has won, then Nixon will have won, because he's kind of dealt with the attrition of information and bad press and things like that. But I haven't seen that happen, but that's also another rare way apparently that Nixon can win. So it's a pretty simple and straightforward game. A lot of devil is in the details of these different events and things, as well as in the case of the Washington Post, you can see they have the journalists here. This is Carl Bernstein. These are sort of like reusable events, because like I said, most of the events, when you play them for the event, they're going to go out of the game, which is a good way to kind of thin your deck down. We'll talk more about that in the review. But each side has a journalist, in the case of the Washington Post, and then the Nixon deck here has some conspirators in it. For example, here's John Ehrlichman, and this is sort of his sort of reusable events. These are very powerful cards that you So you want to be able to get to, especially at the end of the game, because they can swing stuff pretty dramatically in your favor. And just one other little piece of information here, talking about the rules. The rules are very straightforward, but it also has a nice good chunk of history here in the back of the rules about what the different cards are, and there's a little bit more of a narrative history in the back here in terms of, like, all the events surrounding this. So if you're not familiar with this, as time goes on, this becomes less and less in the consciousness, definitely, of the United States citizens, probably for sure the rest of the world. This will give you some kind of background in terms of how this investigation unraveled, and in real life ended with the resignation of the president. Okay, so that is Watergate. Let's go through my 3 pillars of reviews. The first thing we'll talk about is player count. It only plays 2 player. There's no other way to play it to any other player count. The play time I alluded to at the beginning, I think the box says 30 to 45 minutes, and I would say that's exactly right. 45 minutes would be a little bit on the long end once you kind of get to know and play the game. Although I have had a couple of sort of knockdown, drag out endings to the game that were actually very exciting. And then the last kind of pillar before I get into my general thoughts is, what is the game like? Well, obviously there's the comparison to Twilight Struggle, because you're playing the cards for like influence points to manipulate the initiative track or for the event, and the events also kind of go out of your deck and out of the game to kind of thin your deck down and kind of sort of accidentally, but it's by design to tune your deck as the game progresses and you get kind of towards the end game. You're able to kind of cycle through it a little bit quicker. And now I would say the comparison to Twilight Struggle will probably stop at the card mechanism, because the way that you sort of are building the path and sort of uncovering evidence and blocking out or sort of flipping the different conspirators, that to me plays out quite a bit differently than Twilight Struggle. So it's kind of like if you said this is like, if you're comparing 2 worker placement games, well, they both have worker placement, but that's where the comparison ends. This is, they both have kind of dual use cards, but that's where the comparison really ends, because the actual way that the game plays out over the course of the game is, to me, a lot different. Yeah, and I don't really know that whole, like, evidence thing where you kind of drawing evidence back to Nixon. I don't know of any game like that does anything quite like that, and that really is just a great, awesome part of the game. I really enjoy that. I played a couple games as Nixon. I played a couple games as the Washington Post and the editors, and I really enjoy playing both sides. I might prefer, even though as Nixon I haven't won, I might prefer playing Nixon. Well, a little bit of that might be because I want to win with Nixon. I've gotten close, but I haven't won with him yet, and so it might be a little easier for Washington Post, but I don't know. Maybe the games that I played, I'm like, ooh, I could have done this different. So, but as Nixon, it's very sort of stressful to see, these different markers encroaching on you. You're like, oh, they're making the connections. They revealed this and that little story, this little thread. And it's like, I've got to kind of block, them around this way. I've got to really, focus on this conspirator and, kind of block things out and sort of muddy the waters over on this side of the board and that kind of thing. And there's a real kind of give and take and a play with, manipulating all those evidences and trying to build those, but then also trying to get those momentum things on your side. Getting the initiative token is very important because you get to go first, you get the extra card, and that's huge. And you think, well, that's too powerful. Well, get it back, and then use it on your turn and really hammer your opponent with it. But as Nixon, again, I can't really stress this enough, and it's hard to sort of say and prove to you logically, mechanically why this is. But it is stressful. It feels very sort of it like hints at the paranoia of it, right? Because you've done wrong in the course of the game, and they're sort of linking a crime back to you. You're trying to cover it up and distract with the evidence and all that kind of stuff, and really play with that. But then at the end of the day, you're also trying to get that momentum marker to your side, because if you let the game kind of go on long enough, they're inevitably going to just make the connection, because that's the inevitability of it. Is the crime was committed, the connection's going to be made. But if you can get the momentum on your side to sort of halt or stop the investigation and that kind of thing, that little red token kind of is sort of abstractly represents that aspect of it. All of this other sort of political machine type of things that you're doing, and sort of the PR of the press and all that stuff, and the political goodwill and all that, so all that's kind of baked into that red token. Whereas the real concrete work is being done by the Washington editor and by the Nixon administration to prevent the evidence. All that other stuff is just fluff, and it's all baked into that red token. So that's an interesting kind of idea there. So then as the Washington Post player, it feels very satisfying to sink your teeth in and draw those kind of conclusions and webs back to Nixon, and then sort of not really convict him of the crime, but get him to the point where he has to resign. There's a lot of good, interesting elements here, because just the nature of the card play, similar to Twilight Struggle again, is sort of evaluating the cost of the card in a way, because it's like, well, if I do this, then I can move this token a bunch. But this event, you cannot overlook any of the events, of course, because the main thing with the events is flipping the conspirators or making them so they don't flip. And once you sort of get those sort of threads started, then you're going to be in good shape as the Washington editor. Whereas Nixon, one of the best strategies to do is just, if you get a conspirator card, you flip it and then it's locked down. And there's no way that fella is going to flip back over and then flip on you. So that's a real thing that Nixon has to chase, and that's really going to hinder the Washington Post player from kind of like his efficiency of the card play. So I know it's kind of an abstract kind of beardy term, but once you sort of lock him into forcing himself to figure out which the conspirators they need to link to you, and you sort of lock him out of something, then you can start to work on the momentum side as the Nixon player. So there's a very interesting kind of give and take there of sort of the shape of the board, and as you get those evidence tokens out. It's all very abstract. So I'm having a hard time, as the words leave my mouth, I'm like, there's no emotion in this. I'm just talking about mechanics. But when you're in the midst of the game and you're playing it and you're blocking stuff off and you're making links and stuff, it's just really, really engaging. And the fact that it only plays like a half an hour is really cool, and you can easily kind of flip and take turns. You play Nixon, I'll play the Post now, so you get a couple of games done in about an hour. And it feels like a meaty, crunchy, sort of full course meal of a game, and not like a 30-minute kind of, you're just kind of filling time kind of thing. There's a lot going on. There's a lot of replayability and stuff here in terms of your choices. You can try different things and play around with different things. And there's, because of the kind of the two dual win ideas, you can really kind of go for, I'm just going to hammer on momentum as Nixon, or even as the Washington Post player, and slowly build up the evidence. Or you can kind of go the reverse, or like I talked about, manipulating the conspirators, that kind of thing. And then, try to tick or tack that initiative marker a little bit, and, see how much you want to fool around with that. So there is some kind of revisiting that can happen with this game. And I'm definitely looking forward to playing this, half dozen more times. To kind of just feel the game out. So I definitely recommend folks take a look at it. I think it's a very interesting subject matter for a game. I think it evokes a lot of probably sort of the emotional experience for the editors in sort of drawing those connections and trying to keep their investigation alive before Nixon can kind of flip the momentum politically to his side. And then the Nixon side is just the reverse of that. You're trying to just claw and just, come up for air and just try to dog paddle and swim your way to completing your term as president, and that whole thing. So again, it's very, very interesting and visceral and emotional and stuff, but it's all conveyed through this, pretty abstract mechanism. So I definitely recommend everybody give this one a shot. I think there's a lot to sort of revisit and chew into here, and it's very solid. It feels very balanced and all that kind of stuff. So anyway, that is Watergate. Take a look at it. Thanks.